Hello, I'm Wolf Blitzer. It's 1 p.m. here in Washington. Wherever you're watching from around the world, thanks very much for joining us. So right now, pressure on President Donald Trump over allegations of sexual assault, as nearly 60 female members of Congress have signed on to a letter calling for a formal investigation into the allegations. We expect to hear from some of them any moment now. Stand by for that. But the president is hitting right back against those sexual assault claims, his accusers and the Democrats, tweeting in part, quote, "The Democrats have been unable to show any collusion with Russia, so now they are moving on to the false accusations and fabricated stories of women who I don't know and or have never met." Close quote. But it's this tweet that's stirring lots more emotion. Quote, "Lightweight Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, a total flunky for Chuck Schumer and someone who would come to my office begging for campaign contributions not so long ago and would do anything for them, is now in the ring fighting against Trump. Very disloyal to Bill and crooked, used." Gillibrand has been outspoken on the issue of sexual harassment, calling on President Trump actually to resign. After the president's tweet today, she fired right back, saying she and other women speaking out won't be silenced. Let's go to our senior White House correspondent, Jim Acosta. He's over at the White House. So are you hearing any more reaction? What else are White House officials saying about those rather controversial presidential tweets?
Well, Wolf, we have gone back to the White House press secretary and her top aides over here over the last several hours to ask what, in fact, did the president mean when he said that Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who has been very critical of him in recent days and called on him to resign yesterday, as you said, to CNN, what he meant when he said that Senator Gillibrand would do anything for a campaign contribution. As a matter of fact, Wolf, as he was signing a defense authorization bill over here at the White House in the last several minutes, I asked the president what he meant about that, and he did not respond. But Senator Gillibrand is responding. She spoke to reporters earlier this morning. Here's what she had to say.
It was a sexist smear attempting to silence my voice. And I will not be silenced on this issue. Neither will the women who stood up to the president yesterday, and neither will the millions of women who have been marching since the Women's March to stand up against policies they do not agree with.
Now, Wolf, just to give you a sense as to how sensitive this matter is over at the White House, I will tell you, in the moments before I asked the president that question in the Roosevelt Room as he was signing that defense authorization bill, the White House press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, pulled me aside. This was prior to me asking that question of the president, and she warned me that if I asked the president a question at this pool spray, as we call them, that she could not promise that I would be allowed into a pool spray again. Wolf, this was a direct threat coming from the press secretary to me, warning me not to ask a question. And of course, I went ahead and asked the question anyway, and the president did not respond. But Wolf, as you know, we don't respond to threats. We're not going to be intimidated, but that did happen prior to my asking that question of the president.
Yeah, I noticed. I want you to stand by, Jim, because the news conference up on Capitol Hill is just getting underway. This is the Democratic Women's Working Group. Representatives Lois Frankel, Brenda Lawrence, and Jackie Spear. They are speaking out right now. Let's listen in.
The Me Too movement has arrived. As sexual abuse will not be tolerated, whether it's by a Hollywood producer, the chef of a restaurant, a member of Congress, or the President of the United States. No man or woman is above the law. Me Too is saying loud and clear that accusations of sexual abuse should be taken seriously. Victims must be heard, perpetrators must be held accountable, and all parties should have an opportunity for a fair resolution. To date, more than 17 women have publicly come forward to accuse Donald Trump of sexual misconduct, forced kissing, unwanted touching, and groping on an airplane, in a corporate office, in a pageant dressing room. The president tweets denials, and his press secretary comes out to say the matter has been litigated, which is why over 100 Democrats, and incidentally, this letter that I'm going to talk about was initially sent by 59, most overwhelming number of the women in our Democratic caucus, and the men have insisted that they join on. So we have over 100 members right now, and that number is rising. And we've joined in a letter to the Oversight and Government Reform Committee calling for a congressional investigation into the allegations of sexual misconduct by Donald J. Trump. Simply said, Americans deserve the truth.
And they've written a formal letter to the chairman of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, Trey Gowdy, and the ranking Democrat, Elijah Cummings, wanting a full investigation of the president of the United States amidst these sexual misconduct allegations. Let's discuss this and more. We have our CNN Politics senior writer, Juana Summers, with us, our political director, David Chalian, and Bloomberg News White House reporter, Shannon Pettypiece. Shannon, what do you make of this call? 60 women, and now you hear a whole bunch of Democratic men, lawmakers, they've signed on. They want a formal investigation by this committee.
I think the issue is not going away. This topic, which in a news cycle where topics come in and out at rapid fire within a few hours, this issue around sexual misconduct, not only among the president, but members of Congress, in the media, across industries, is sticking. It is lasting. It's clearly resonating with a lot of people on this issue with the president. Of course, these are Democrats. Republicans control the House and the Senate. So it will be in Republicans, jurisdiction to decide whether they want to move forward with this. But it certainly looks bad on Republicans' part if they don't. And of course, if there's a shift in 2018, this is just one more thing the Democrats could to come after the president on.
Well, it's up to the chairman, Trey Gowdy. He's the Republican chairman of this committee. He's got to make an important decision.
He does, although, as was just being said, clearly there's no expectation that Republicans are going to sort of take the lead on this. But I do think it is a preview of what a democratically controlled Congress may look like if, after the 2018 elections, the Democrats were to regain the majority. Wolf, I think these issues of this kind of investigation, impeachment hearings, more calls for resignation, everything you're hearing out of the Democrats right now, it's less about what they can do in this moment and more about a predicate for an argument to voters throughout 2018 and what a Democratic-controlled Congress may look like.
And it comes amidst the, I want to get into this tweet that the president launched this morning against New York Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. Let me put it up on the screen one more time. Lightweight Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, a total flunky for Chuck Schumer, and someone who would come to my office begging for campaign contributions not so long ago, and then in parentheses, and would do anything for them, close parentheses, is now in the ring fighting against Trump, very disloyal to Bill and Crooked, used, and would do anything for them. Hold on for a moment, because Congresswoman Jackie Speier is now speaking out. We'll get right back to you, Juana.
Time. And it is under that House rule that we are calling on the Government Oversight Committee to do the investigation. But what took place this morning when the president tweeted about our colleague, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, is grotesque. It took my breath away, and it represents the conduct of a person who is ill-equipped to be the president of the United States.
Absolutely. Okay. We'll all say amen to that. Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to know if you guys would be willing to fly to standard member of your own party. You have a member including your right now. Would you be willing to call for an ethics investigation or anything of that?
I think all of us I think we've all taken the position that we want a fair process here. Some of us have been working with the House Administration Committee to get a fair process. I think that's what we're all about.
I think the Democratic Party has been very strong in saying that there should be an ethics investigation, and that you have seen actions from the Democratic Party that we're not running away from this. We are standing together and saying accountability goes all the way to the White House.
I think we believe that sexual abuse, victims of sexual abuse, perpetrators, there's no specific race or religion or ethnicity or party. I think Republicans and Democrats, independents, are all equal opportunity offenders. Anybody else? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, that was Congresswoman Lois Frankel of Florida, and you also heard Jackie Speier very, very angry, Juana, at that tweet that the president launched, especially what he said in parentheses about New York Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, and would do anything for them, asking for campaign contributions.
Absolutely. We heard Congresswoman Spear of California call that a grotesque statement, unfit for the president's office. She's been one of the leading lawmakers on Capitol Hill who's been pushing this effort for members of Congress to clean up their act and to bring more transparency onto the process as to how those claims are handled. I think what's really important here also is Senator Gillibrand's response. As you noted, she said she would not be silenced. President Trump referred to her as someone who is being in the ring with him on these issues. So I think these tweets really tell you a lot about the president's worldview. He sees her as a political opponent. I think this gives us a preview to what a 2020 campaign can and will look like against this president. The argument that Democrats are likely to wage, particularly now, is there's so much attention being paid to these issues of harassment and misconduct by powerful men in all walks of life, not just politics.
And everyone is asking, David, what did the president mean when he said, and would do anything for them?
You heard Jim Acosta asked him that very question directly, and he refused to answer. And there's only one person that can answer that question, Donald Trump, who issued the tweet. Nobody else can answer that, and he refused to do so. But clearly that question hangs out there about what he meant, although Kirsten Gillibrand, in her response, and many of her colleagues clearly feel they have a clear idea of what he meant by that.
Senator Elizabeth Warren was very blunt in that area.
Exactly. To Juana's point about looking ahead to 2020 for a moment, Kirsten Gillibrand is thrilled to have this fight. Let's make no bones about that. I mean, this is... she wants to be in the arena. She does want to be seen as the opponent to Donald Trump. You'll recall a few weeks ago, she was out there in a New York Times podcast saying, well, if Bill Clinton were having his problems now, he should have been impeached, or he should resign from office. You saw her leading the way on Al Franken, a beloved liberal in her own party, to get him out of office and get his resignation. And now she's in this fight with Donald Trump. This is part of becoming her 2020 brand, as she is clearly going to be looking at a possible presidential contest as well.
I do wonder this issue, though, of women's rights and going after sexual misconduct. How strong of a brand or case that's going to be in 2020? Because I mean, I know there's a lot that can happen between now and then. The fact that we're even talking about it is a little sillier at this point. But in 2016. The election wasn't about that. The Democrats tried to make it about that. It tried to make it about the accusers. They tried to make it about the Access Hollywood video. And the voters said, no, it's about jobs. It's about immigration. It's about strong America and these other issues. So I don't know. Maybe
I agree with you. It may not be a
yeah.
voting issue then, but it's part of her brand building right now. I'm not looking to the electorate in 2020. I'm saying as Kirsten Gillibrand is starting to form her public perception and brand in advance of that, this is clearly now an issue that she's fully identified with.
And one of the other tweet he did this morning, this is the president. I'll read it to you once again. Despite thousands of hours wasted and many millions of dollars spent, the Democrats have been unable to show any collusion with Russia. So now they are moving on to the false accusations and fabricated stories of women I don't know and or have never met. Fake news.
There's a lot to unpack there, Wolf. At first, you have the president saying, these women are only coming out because Democrats are pushing this. Then you have him saying that he didn't know these women. You also have him saying that these instances didn't happen. I think, and this is something the White House has said time and time again. This was asked and answered during the 2016 campaign. The voters made a different choice. They elected President Donald Trump. But I think when you have more than 100 members of Congress saying there should be an investigation, when you have, as CNN has reported, as many as 15 women with a wide range of allegations from lewd comments all the way to sexual assault, that demonstrates to me that not only is this not asked and answered, it's not just a he said, she said, it is a he said, she said, she said, she said issue, and that there are still a lot of Americans who do have questions about this. I'm not sure what eyewitnesses the White House press secretary is referring to. We don't really have evidence that there are eyewitnesses out there who have denied that these things happen.
Well, of course, there's some evidence of the president on tape himself, as people have been playing with this Howard Stern interview and, of course, the Access Hollywood tape. So.
And simply because he got elected is not the answer to the question.
Absolutely.
I mean, that doesn't negate what these women are saying simply because he did get elected despite these allegations being out in public.
And it's a hot issue right now. A year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, not as hot. This is a compelling development that has happened over these past few months. It's certainly not going to go away. Juana, David, and Shanna, guys, thanks very, very much.